Previously on HELIOS Protocol. The first experiment was never meant to change history. Everything appeared normal. Then the impossible happened. The experiment ended, but the emergency had only begun. The answers they found raised even greater questions. Every discovery carries a cost. 3 days later, humanity prepared once again. Far from Mars, life on Earth never stopped moving. On Earth, preparation had already begun. Mars had changed how Earth approached the unknown. Earth's answer would begin with caution. The first lesson was to remove people from danger. The second was to prepare for failure. This time, safety came first. Experiment E2 was ready. The laboratory was finally complete. But readiness was no longer measured by technology alone. Then, someone unexpected arrived. Some people never needed an introduction. Respect outlived every title. Retirement had ended his career, but not his curiosity. Some colleagues became lifelong friends. The engineering was finished. Now came the question that truly mattered. He wasn't looking at what had been built. He was looking for what had been learned. Every discovery begins with a question. The impossible had already happened. Now the real work began. Science doesn't celebrate miracles. It explains them. Earth had built the perfect laboratory. But one question still remained. Being ready didn't mean rushing forward. If anyone understood the risks, it was the man who had witnessed them firsthand. The next experiment would not begin on Earth. It would begin on Mars. On Mars, the questions had never stopped. The laboratory remembered everything. Some evidence was too important to replace. For Dr. Ilyas Rahman, the experiment had never truly ended. This time, nothing would be overlooked. A new perspective had arrived. Some answers required different questions. Even first impressions could reveal two different worlds. Different customs, but the same purpose. Before asking new questions, she studied the old ones. The experiment itself could still speak. Every answer was already hidden somewhere in the data. Every mystery has a beginning. At first, nothing appeared out of place, but memory sometimes noticed what instruments ignored. The investigation had finally reached the right moment. Sometimes, the smallest signal can change everything. The timeline no longer agreed with their assumptions. For the first time, the right question had appeared. They had been measuring the consequence, not the beginning. The discharge was no longer the mystery. Every experiment depends on asking the right question. The experiment had never been wrong. Only the question had been. Before another experiment could begin, Earth needed to see what they had found. Nearly 20 minutes later, Mars received its answer. One observation had changed the entire experiment. She had seen enough. The safest experiment was the one they chose not to perform. The experiment would wait. Only one thing remained. They had to wait. While Earth stood still, Mars prepared to listen. The next experiment would begin by listening. Everything was ready. This time, nothing would begin without understanding. The battery waited. Then, the second experiment began. For the first time, they watched the beginning. Seconds passed, but nothing changed. The laboratory remained silent. Whatever they had found appeared to be gone. There was no resonance, no anomaly. The evidence refused to change. After hours of observation, there was nothing left to find. Mars believed the experiment had failed. On Earth, the conclusion seemed certain. Then, something asked to be noticed. There was no power, no active experiment. And yet, the battery continued charging. The impossible needed no witness. It needed only proof. The second experiment had not failed. It had answered from another world. Minutes later, Earth replied. Mars had searched for an answer. Earth had found one. They believed the resonance could travel only 5 meters. They were wrong. For several seconds, no one spoke. They had spent days searching for failure. Instead, they had found proof. But one person still needed to hear the answer. 3 days earlier, Leo had asked whether the experiment had worked. Now, they could finally answer him. The experiment had not failed. The answer had crossed the distance between worlds. For Ilyas, the impossible had finally begun to make sense. For Leo, the risk had not been meaningless. For the first time since the accident, Mars allowed itself to celebrate. Across another world, relief became celebration. Humanity had discovered something impossible. Energy had crossed the distance between Earth and Mars. The mystery was far from solved. But for one night, the future could wait.